Welcome to episode 121 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. In today's episode, I am so honored to introduce you to 4 of the founding members of the newly formed GAABS, the Global Association of Applied Behavioral Scientists. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. Today on the show, I have 4 guests joining me. They are some of the founding members of the Global Association of Applied Behavioral Scientists, lovingly referred to as GAABS, which officially launched in September of 2020. As a rapidly growing and currently unregulated field, GAABS comes in as the world's first independent organization representing the interests of applied behavioral scientists, primarily those working in the private sector, and has an impressive list of founders, starting members, and advisory board members, including Daniel Kahneman and Robert Cialdini. It's going to be an increasingly valuable and important organization as the years pass, and I'm so excited to be here to introduce you to the group in its infancy. Much like episode 115, when I introduced the Certificate in Applied Behavioral Economics at Texas A&M University, there are very condensed show notes for this episode. It's pretty much just the links to the GAABS website, LinkedIn, and Twitter accounts, so it's as streamlined and simple as possible for anyone who is interested in learning more. Those show notes can be found within the app you're listening to or at thebrainybusiness.com/121. Those already on the Brainy Business list got a direct link from me in the email you receive every Friday. And for everyone who's not yet on the list, simply sign up for any freebie at thebrainybusiness.com and you'll be automatically added. And for those of you in the States, you can sign up easily by texting the word Brainy, BRAINY, to 33777. You'll be added to the list and get access to a super secret subscribers page with more than 50 freebies as a thank you. All right, without further ado, let's jump right in and introduce you to these 4 amazing founding members who will introduce themselves and share a little of their backgrounds to kick things off. Torben, Madeline, Dario, and Nuala, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So we have 4 guests joining me on the show today. So we'll go ahead and do kind of a round robin of introductions of who you are, what your background in behavioral science is, and then we'll talk a bit more about our other friend, Gabs. So let's go ahead. We will start with Torben and then can just kind of go around the group.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks very much, Melina. So my name is Torben Emmerling. I'm the founder and managing partner of Affective Advisory. We're a fully specialized behavioral science advisory firm based in Zurich, Switzerland. And we work with applying behavioral insights for both public and private organizations in strategy, marketing, communications, public policy, everything related to behavioral change. We've created an own published framework, and we love to apply what we believe is the most interesting and important science these days to business problems and public policy problems around the world.
All right. And Nuala?
Hi, Melina. I'm the Irish contingent to the group. And my background is similar to Torben's in some ways, financial services, management consulting, and sports. I also have my own business set up, which is Mindequity, and I focus on financial services, oil and gas, and sports. So also looking at the private sector. And for my spins and in my spare time, I sit on a number of other boards, which are slightly different. One is in the investment management industry, which has a love of statistics and everything that we know incredibly well. And from a sports perspective, I sit on a board with the Football Association and World Athletics, and their interest is primarily discrimination, again, another area for behavioral science. And the third area is, human rights. So I sit on the board for UN Women, which I think is a topic that we all know pretty well and has got a lot of airspace.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And let's now, would it be Madeline or Madeline?
Maddie is fine, actually. Maddie's just fine. We're all friends here. Yeah, Madeline's my extremely grown-up name, so we won't use that. Yeah, thanks so much for having us on. So my background is a little bit similar to Nuala's in that I come from a background mainly of finance and also had a huge passion for psychology, and somewhere along that journey discovered that there's this magical crossover between the two, which really led me down the rabbit hole of behavioral science and taking higher education in the field. And as a result, founded the behavioral science consultancy of mine, which is called Salient. And essentially, we apply kind of academic rigor and insight to practice from a behavioral point of view in any kind of real context you can think of, anywhere from air traffic management to financial institutions to nonprofits and healthcare. So we're very excited to be part of GAABS as well.
Awesome. And it sounds, accent-wise, it sounds like you might be in the States.
So I'm actually Canadian.
Okay.
I met all these folks when I was living in the UK, when I was living in London, and that's where all of this really started. But I have since moved back home to Calgary, Canada. So yes, Canadian checking in.
Nice. Well, then North America, I suppose.
That's right.
And we'll get to how everyone met and how GAABS came about in just 1 minute, but we have one more introduction. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you. So my name is Dario. Hi, everyone. I am assistant professor of behavioral science, and I work at the London School of Economics. And I primarily have two roles. So on the one hand, I research how to actually use behavioral science to solve real-world problems. Then on the other hand, I work on the executive master in behavioral science, which is actually how all of us met, where we basically try to use insights from academia and teach those insights to students. And then we hope that they will take them to the real world and apply to solving real world problems. And this was actually one of the beginnings of GAABS, how we all met and how it all started, which is what we will probably now talk about.
Yeah. So you all went to school together or?
Different years, yes. We share the same alma mater, but different years, met across a number of occasions, but haven't spent the same years in London. Definitely connected afterwards in a very good fashion.
Yeah. So who wants to tell the story of how GAABS came about? And maybe we'll get all the little points. Okay, so Maddie's up. She's going to tell us.
Sure, I'll jump in. So I think that GAABS had its underpinnings in conversation sort of over time in a lot of different conversations, especially between and within kind of different groups of the founding members who ended up taking it forward in the years that kind of preceded. But it really sort of started to take off in early to mid 2019. And in the summer of 2019, we had a conference that was hosted at the LSE, and it was aimed at kind of bridging the gap between academia and practice when it came to behavioral science, and to really bring together the alumni and see what is everybody doing out in the field and what are some kind of topical issues that we can discuss. So that kind of all came together in this final panel at the conference, which included myself, Steve Martin, Matteo Galizzi, and Liam Delaney, as well as Christina Gravert. And we were discussing, so these kind of all ended up being sort of founding members, except for Christina. But we were discussing the commercialization of behavioral science and what was coming next, because there has been this huge demand for sort of a body or some kind of representation for practitioners. And so many people had the same question of, how do we sort of protect this as an industry as it kind of reaches this critical mass and this surge of interest from people demanding it, wanting consulting in it and wanting to apply it. And so we were asked on the panel, can you kind of commit to taking this forward? You're talking about how important this is. Do you kind of commit to doing something about it? And so we all kind of in agreement said, yeah, definitely. And then Steve emailed a few of us afterwards and said, are we doing this? like, I think we should do this. Who's all in? And that really kind of took it to the next level. Because once you kind of name something, as we all know from trying to nudge ourselves, making a commitment publicly and then to each other, it really took off a life of its own from there. And so we've been working on it over the past year since then.
Awesome. And so GAABS, it stands for the Global Association of Applied Behavioral Science. And what's the vision? It just launched early September 2020, right? So what's the vision? What's the hope? What's the need, I guess, for why it exists?
I think Maddie, to be fair, captured the main reason and rationale, which plays directly into what the hope is. At the end of the day, this is an unregulated industry for applied practitioners. And what we're hoping to do is to guard against a proliferation of people who are not bona fide practitioners in the field. And I think everybody who's been through the rigor of academic training or years in the field really does appreciate that the word science isn't there by accident, that this is a scientific field and it requires that level of rigor and robustness that the word science engenders. And the idea is really just to protect the field, just in the same way as you would have regulate. We're not the regulator, but this is an unregulated field. And we've all seen the dangers in other industries when experiments or even strategies in some cases happen without there being any consequences. So for us, it's about trying to legitimize more of the behaviors that take place, because at the end of the day, the behavioral science community is as vulnerable to any of the biases that we recommend, in companies and in the private sector. So because of that, we developed a number of different, tools. The code of conduct and the constitution, which I know Torben is expert in, is probably jumping to tell us about now in a moment. But they are incredibly important tools, as are the criteria for membership, which I think people have been really interested in and so far been incredibly supportive of.
Yeah. So, well, let's go ahead then. Torben, tell us about the rules.
Yeah, the rules is a big word. I would say what's important is that GAABS is an entity. It's a nonprofit, member-based association, and as it stands, it's there for all the bona fide behavioral science practitioners out there, and it's essentially a platform to bridge, as Dario, Maddie, and Nuala said before, academia and practice. And we're very, very happy that not only some of the leading practitioners in this world, but also some of the most renowned names in academia have joined this initiative. We are very happy and proud to see Professor Daniel Kahneman, Professor Robert Cialdini, Jennifer Lerner, Dilip Soman, and many more people we announce in the upcoming weeks on this advisory board, and to see many of the leading practitioners on the executive board. And all of these people have committed to create an independent body. So it's not owned by any of the founding member organizations of any person. It's truly there to connect the field and to make sure that the ethical and technical standards of behavioral science are kept, are even raised, and are sort of advocated around the world to set certain standards, not only for the practitioners, but also for the clients commissioning behavioral science services to navigate the market and look for a quality sign that they can use for orientation. I think that's most important to summarize. This comes with a couple of legal articles and a code of conduct and everything, but very essentially, it's a member-based association, and we look for people who want to drive and develop this together with us.
Right. And so this kind of helps to prevent, I know that early on in my own consultancy and seeing where other people that were doing workshops or something where you could tell that it was like, I'm going to read nudge to you for 2 days while you come to my workshop because I'm a behavioral scientist, quote unquote. Right. And so, reading a book is not the same as, getting the degree and really doing the work, and where anybody could call themselves, a behavioral scientist, a behavioral economist, whatever it happens to be. But for any of the entities out there that are looking to hire people and to make sure that there is this legitimacy within the field and we don't end up, I know there's been that big fear where people are talking about if if everybody is just going and running a bunch of experiments and they don't set them up properly and say, well, it doesn't work. Behavioral science is a myth. It's not real because we tried it and it didn't work in our one study that we did, or you couldn't replicate something. And so it seems like that's a big motivation. I know from Torben when we had talked previously that, that's something to help prevent happening. And that's why one of the reasons GAABS really came about.
Yeah, and exactly right. What you said, there is a little paper under review by the wonderful Paul Dolan and Steve Martin that essentially touches upon this point. We are in a situation in this field where essentially everyone could call themselves a behavioral scientist, and that's right. Quite special, because if you've got a problem with your central heating system, you wouldn't just want to hire anyone who's read a book about fixing heating systems or seen a YouTube video on how to fix a boiler. So we essentially have a growing interest, and with this growing interest in the field, there is a growing responsibility to take care that the applications of behavioral science are done in the right way to exactly not have these situations where people say, well, we've tried it, it didn't work. On the other hand, we want to cultivate different approaches. We don't want to standardize things. We want to be an open, as I said, a very open, welcoming body where we integrate and see many different approaches, because essentially this is all what behavioral science is about: trying it, experimenting, leading with evidence, and then taking this evidence together, connect and see what has worked, and for the benefit of everyone, basically. So definitely right that we need to make sure there are certain standards that are kept. And at the same time, within this sort of standardization frame, there's a lot of different approaches tried, and we're well connected to see what has worked, what is working, and how others could benefit from these insights and experiences.
Let's just add to that as well that, it's one of the kind of visions and benefits that we see for membership going forward is using this as a forum. And something that I think has really been lacking in the space is not having this really holistic and transparent view of how different practice of behavioral science is being done in different contexts around the world, and having sort of one place to go to see, here are all of the practitioners that do this. Does anybody know of any context where this has worked, or has anyone tried this? And what does the success look like for this? And I think we all have that in our own circles of behavioral science practitioners, people that we know, people that we've gone to school with, people that we've worked with, to draw upon. But to have this as a real forum for people to come together that are doing this in a quality way, with that extra benefit of having an academic advisory board to be bouncing off more technical things and that type of approach, I think is really invaluable, and something that we've all identified as a gap and that we're trying to fill with GAABS as well.
I think Maddie's right, and maybe an indication of all that she said is by the type of response that we've had so far. And and Dario will have a very clear and more insightful view from an academic side in terms of the response from the different universities and his peer group. But maybe it's just worth mentioning the types of companies, that have expressed interest so far. We have had a huge response from individuals, which is, I think, pretty interesting, and sends a signal that there's a demand in the industry for individual members. And equally, the kinds of companies that have expressed interest are several-fold, but one in particular that stands out to me maybe is the smaller units, if you like, of the huge firms. So like of the huge consulting firms, the huge banks, they all have dedicated behavioral science practices within them. But as you know, if you've ever worked in any of these big organizations, when you're the small element or the untried and tested area, and behavioral science is a fledgling area, it's not established, it's not finance, it's not HR. When you're in that sort of minority group in a large company, you're always on your mettle. You're always having to prove yourself. You're always having to go the extra mile. You're always short of resources and short of budgets. So that group in particular are very keen to have their own network and their own community within this space. And in particular, I think they really appreciate the access and the insight that the advisory board and the academics are going to provide.
Right. Well, and being able to show that there are those rules of membership, which I know we'll get to in a minute. I know Dario has something to say before we get to that, but being able to show that you met some sort of criteria qualification to be here, right? There is some higher entity that shows that we have worth. We've got our social proof in there, of course. So being able to have that is important for sure, as those groups are wanting to show their worth, like you were saying, Nuala. And Dario, you're up.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add something to what both Torben and Madeline said. So one thing is, like in any domain, basically fake news are a big problem, and people who are interested in behavioral science, who want to apply behavioral science, they may see a lot of things that are not true, and they may not know where to look for information. So one of the aims of GAABS is also basically to help those people to point them towards high quality information, so they can basically distinguish what may be fake news from what is actually practically applicable and what they should try to use in their companies. And from my perspective, working in academia, young students who are now basically undergraduate or finishing their master degree, they are becoming increasingly interested in behavioral science, because a lot of them don't just want to stay in academia, they want to take this and practically apply it, and they find it very meaningful. And so we have a lot of interest from people who are also just finishing their studies. They either want to work in behavioral science, they want to found their own consultancies, they want to join companies, they want to found behavioral insights units within companies. So there is generally a lot of interest, both from people who are just entering the field and from people who are already established, either in behavioral science or just who work in various companies but want to use behavioral science.
Right. And whether for them being able to search and say, what companies do I want to work for? These are the ones that are already GAABS members. And the flip side, I'm sure, of if you are able to join as an individual, then you can be more appealing to say, I am a member of GAABS. Like, you know, I'm legit. I'm not really just making that up.
Exactly.
Maybe there's one thing, Melina, that that we should probably point out is what we're not. So we've all spoke about what we are, but one thing that we're not is we're not here to say, we're not here to do Dario's job, if you like, or to do your job. I know you've got your new certificate coming up. We are not there to provide that kind of certification and that kind of training.
Right.
And there are other groups around the world involved in behavioural science, and they are very much in favour of providing training courses and everything else. But that's probably something that we're not doing. It's not on our it's not our modus operandi, because there are so many other groups that are going into that space for exactly the reasons that we mentioned up front, which is for that, to make sure that it is a legitimate field and there are many people out there who are qualified, to practice in this space, to protect clients as well as themselves and their own brand reputation, which is ultimately at stake. If one of their experiments goes wrong or there's a backfire effect, as we saw recently, certainly with, the coronavirus and some of the comments that have been made in the UK in particular.
Right.
Sometimes it's not always a great thing to toot your own horn.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Well, and that's, you're not in the business of training the behavioral scientists so much as once people have gone through London School of Economics or Warwick School of Business or Toronto or Wharton or Texas A&M, right? Wherever you go, you get your training, you're in there, you've made it to a point where you can prove that you meet the membership requirements, then you get to be part of the group. So let's talk about what those requirements are. Who wants to jump on that one?
So I go first. I give it a try, and then everybody jump in and add to my first comments. I think what's important is we distinguish two types of membership. So there is an individual membership and an organizational membership. That means you can join as a qualified individual practitioner, and you can also join as a dedicated behavioral science consultancy or a dedicated unit within a wider non-behavioral science organization. And for the individual memberships, we look for people who have qualification criteria. So people who are able to show they've completed a postgraduate qualification on a master's or PhD level in a relevant subject, including but not limited to behavioral science, behavioral economics, neuroscience, decision science, etc. So the behavioral sciences that you have studied and you know how to technically and ethically apply these insights in practice. And we also look for sort of alternatively, because we know that various people, some of the most well-known people in this field, have not had a behavioral science training at university level, but still they are some of the most important contributors to this field. We all know these names. And we also want to be welcoming and inclusive to other criteria or other proof of being a recognized practitioner. And here we look, for example, for a postgraduate training program that you did in addition to, for example, relevant publication, positions as a teacher, or just relevant contributions to the field in form of reports, research, or other elements where you can show, say, okay, GAABS board, this is how we want to be seen, what we can contribute to the field, what we have done, and we're very happy to take a look at these applications as well and be welcoming, as we said. So that's the individual side. For the organizational side, it's really easy. We look for proof that it's a proper behavioral science unit or consultancy. And here we say, well, 2/3 of the people doing behavioral science work need to qualify via the individual membership criteria. So everything we just outlined before, if 2/3 of your team are able to do this or able to showcase this, it's great. And second, we want to see a bit of a portfolio or sort of a bit of an idea that people are actually doing this in practice, not just putting a little icing on the cake and selling the same old cake with a new tasty coverage. And I think it's really clear, and we've seen from the applications so far, by the way, we've received an enormous amount of over 550 applications within just 2 weeks. This is just It's fantastic. So there's definitely a need. And we've seen in these applications that people are taking this very seriously. We see a lot of very, very, very good people applying, both organization teams and also individual practitioners.
Right. Well, I know I'm one of the 550. I don't know if I was, I feel like it was like day one, because Torben, you and I had talked about this coming up, a week or maybe 10 days before launch was coming. And so I was very aggressively watching for the announcement.
I don't know the stats in detail. I think Maddie knows them probably better than I do, but I know just by accident that you've been an absolute maximizer on this, and you've been certainly part of the top percentile. So you've been one of the first, definitely within the first 10% of applicants and advocates of this. So thanks very much for your early support in this.
Hooray.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we saw your registration. We saw your registration of interest come through very early on, Melina. We saw it come through. So hopefully you received your automated reply back saying, yes, thank you so much for your interest, and we will be in touch very, very soon. We didn't know that it would be via this, but
right.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
I think it is also important to kind of point out when it comes to like the membership criteria and the membership itself, that we're all very much dedicated to this idea that this is going to be built by the members for the members. The reason that this came to exist at all is because we wanted something like this as practitioners, that we saw this gap saying, well, wouldn't I want this? Just because we happen to create it, we still saw that as an absolute gap and a need. So having it be shaped by the people that apply and by the people that come on board is a huge part of what we believe in from the membership perspective, because everybody's going to have kind of different wants and different desires of the benefits of membership and how they see the future of the practice sort of transforming over time. And we're so excited to take that on board, right? If it's, recommendations for things and willingness to be on committees and to actually drive some of this operationally, that's something that we're, I think, really excited about now that we have actually launched, is to just bring people in and see, what do you think? What do you need? Where are there other holes in this practice and in our field?
Right.
And there's no shortage of ideas, Maddie. We've had a lot of early members which are listed on the website, and some really big names. And they are not shy about forthcoming about what they want from this, and which is terrific, because it means exactly Maddie's point. We're member focused, like a company's client focused. And we want to hear those ideas, because it is, a membership group for members. So all ideas welcome. And if your listeners have any ideas and thoughts, we really would encourage them to get online and make contact with any of us, because we really do want to grow this and to make sure that it hits the mark. And if there's anything, not quite right, that's what we're there for, to work on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can guide, we've kind of laid the foundation, and we can kind of guide the ethos and the values of it, and saying, here's why we exist, and here's how we see this being ethically applied, and here are the values that we embody as a field and as a membership. But the details of how that comes about, that's a moving and living and breathing entity.
Yeah. Think of like an old debate club where we sort of shaped the guiding principles of something as important as a development of a whole science, at least in the applied side of things. And it's important to say we're not distinguishing who's a proper behavioral scientist and who isn't. We're definitely not claiming that we're sort of draw a line between qualified behavioral scientists and non-qualified behavioral scientists. We just say everybody who's interested in such an association, a member-based association that shows that you are part of a qualified group is very, very welcome. And we're very, very open, as Maddie and Nuala just said, to take this further and have a debate, an informed debate of how this future should look like together.
I love the idea too about being able to have that access where other members that are working on projects where some of the research projects take an enormous amount of time, especially in the academic space. And so many might be working on a lot of the same stuff at the same time and say, hey, how did you shape that? Or did you find something early on that I should be keeping in mind now as I'm creating mine versus having to wait for 3 years when your paper gets published and, have those connection points? Or, what was, when you did your literature review on X, what did you find that was really important that might have been kind of a hidden gem of a paper or, something along those lines, and be able to talk about the stuff that didn't make it into the research reports, right? Because there's a lot of that stuff too that's important, but isn't publishable in those ways, and being able to have a reliable space where you can have those conversations and, favorite journals that people like to read or, whatever it is, just to learn from others because, from around the world, I'm sure there are different sources that people look to. And there might be, I know someone I was just interviewing for the show that was saying that they had a report or a project they had worked on, but the entire thing was in German. And so it was like, I don't know that I can help you because it's in German. And unfortunately, I don't read. While it is my dream to be able to speak every single language fluently, I have no skills in that at this point. So that doesn't work. But someone might be able to tell me the gist of what it means, right? With those. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. The importance of that kind of portal, and as a very early goal, as we kind of dive in and get some more resources out to members and really kick this off, I see that forum as a really high priority to be able to share those resources and bounce ideas and have a really interactive space for people to come to, as you say, because so much of official published literature can be quite inaccessible. And there's so much more work that doesn't hit that academic level of publication. And to lose that insight, I think, is just kind of an ongoing tragedy that we can hope to start to solve.
Right. Especially in the applied space, for those of us working with large businesses and even smaller ones, they don't want anyone to know their stuff, right? So you can't publish that you worked with X company and they did this and this was what we found, but you could actually have a conversation with someone and talk about some of the insights in a more general way that would be helpful for someone else that's doing similar research, but you can't actually publish it anywhere, right? So those types of conversations on where for the applied piece versus just in the academic world, you even less, I find, is out in the world that you're able to get access to what people are really working on and what's happening behind the scenes. That is very valuable information, and having a place where we can share and learn from each other is very, very much needed. So I'm excited for that.
Absolutely. And not in a way that, is revealing like trade secrets, of course, and, right, and violating NDAs and things like that. Absolutely. More of a, what's interesting in the space? How are we going about this? And I think a degree of transparency around the way that behavioral science tools are used is a growing piece of this in and of itself. That it isn't all like smoke and mirrors and black boxes and, we're nudging and we're not telling anyone. And, it's all developing. And I think that's one of the most exciting parts about the growth of the field in general, is that you can say we're using behavioral science without giving away the game, because it's that self-understanding and that understanding of others, that's the real value.
I think, Maddie, you're right. And I think it's one of the reasons why academics have been very keen, and we're so keen to work with academics. I mean, Dario arguably could be one of the most popular people around, for the next couple of years, because it's the academics also that have access to tremendous, research. I mean, the courses on technology that are being taught now, I don't know, Melina, if they're on your program, but there are some superb technology-based programs around that aren't in all of the universities, and that all of the behavioral scientists, whether it's from personalization, or the AI, robotics, are absolutely integral now to how these experiments and strategies are being developed. So the access and the proximity and the relationships with leading academics who know what they're talking about in this space and can really help the practitioners develop and create fantastic offerings to clients. Consultants are doing it. Your Accentures, your PwCs, your EYs, they all have these units, but they don't have as many behavioral scientists, if you like, specializing in that intersection. And I think that's where academics like Dario and others, I think would, do add a phenomenal advantage and first mover advantage to those savvy behavioral scientists who are willing to maybe take a risk and move forward in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who can't see us on the Zoom, it's funny where people are like pointing in the Brady Bunch style box of like, so this person wants to talk now, but I don't know if we actually see each other in the same order on our Zooms, right? So we're like, I know that you want to say something, but I can't actually just point at you and have you talk. So, so Torben was maybe either saying something or saying someone else might be ready to say something. I'm not really sure which.
Probably both even. It's a bit of a randomized thing here across the boxes. So touching upon the point you said before about the German language and global projects, we live in essentially a global world right now, especially in these days. Companies and public organizations are commissioning projects around the world, and we are able and we're also required to deliver projects around the world. And with GAABS, we're creating a platform to sort of get local knowledge at a high-level expertise in different areas of the world, which is great because we all know context matters. Context is, if not the most important driver of human behavior. And so knowing the context is really important if you design for behavioral intervention. And it's probably the best thing possible that you have a qualified behavioral science practitioner somewhere in Denmark, in Brazil, Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, wherever in the world, to apply local knowledge to a project. And with GAABS, we're essentially creating such a platform to connect like-minded people and fun people. It's fun to work on projects together. And we essentially discovered that this wonderful behavioral science world, as you can see in this call, being 5 of us here and many more hopefully listening to this around the world, being a very fun group and very inclusive and very interested in creating something together. And this is what is, I think, at least for me, and I think I speak for the rest of all people here on this call, one of the most important motivators to set up GAABS and to sort of create this movement together and be very inclusive.
Yeah.
I think Torben touched on an important point. The global nature of any of these behavioral experiments, of having, global local representation, it's no different than you would have in any sophisticated, mature, complex business. When you're in any large organization, you know that to have a successful project or even a successful culture, that global representation is key. And why wouldn't, again, savvy behavioral scientists not have that representation? It's part of the whole ethos of generalization and replication. So I think us in this group, and again, given the response of the 550 so far and climbing respondents, and hopefully many more after this call, we see, to be fair, that it is very global in response, and people everywhere want that connection. And as I said, because it's a fledgling field, maybe people don't feel it as much as they would have it in a more mature industry. So we are the convener, if you like, of, as Torben says, like-minded, interested people, and we need to replicate that as we would for any of our clients.
Right. I know that, Nuala, you said you came from financial services, or you do work in financial space. That's a lot of where I had started as well, which I've talked about a lot on the show. But being in a credit union side versus a bank side, where credit unions have the mindset, it's said of, sort of the joke, because it's a not for profit or, not space, that you have what we would call co-opetition, that we are maybe competing against the person next door. But, if you're working on a project, sure, I'll tell you about what I did, and here's all my numbers, and here's everything I was looking at. There's so much willingness to share and be open. And I have found, I think that's one of the things I loved about that work, as well as in behavioral science. Everyone for me, I cannot think of a time where I tried to call or send an email or reach out to somebody and they say, no, I refuse to talk to you about things because, I'm too busy and important or whatever. Like across the board, everybody wants to share. They're so excited about what they're working on and just want to be able to help everybody else out it's such an inviting, lovely field to be a part of that. I think it extends that co-opetition mindset that I'm such a fan of.
Totally. It's such a collaborative space. And I think because if you can recognize your own individual strengths as a consultancy or as an individual practitioner, as a company at large, you can still appreciate that someone else knows something more in another field that you could work together on or draw upon or, work towards a common goal. There's so much room for everyone at the table of behavioral science in practice, because there's so much demand and there's so much need for it that it would be so silly to make oneself kind of a gatekeeper or key holder of any particular facet of it. So that's something that is obvious to you, Melina, and I think it's obvious to us that we all have our own individual consultancies, 3 of us on this call, right? And we're not hoarding our work or holding each other back from discussing these things and saying, what's the best way to do this? Which I think is a really unique and positive thing about behavioral science in practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Dario had something to say. You're so polite, Dario. I appreciate that you have something, but then I don't want to. So go ahead.
What I want to say is typically if you just read behavioral science books or journals, a lot of these findings are basically really just from Western countries and countries that are English speaking. So let's say your company somewhere else and you want to apply behavioral science, you may just find something that is not really useful for you because it's not for your culture. But what is the benefit of GAABS is that we are actually connected to people doing this field in Middle East, Africa, in China, in India, South America, so all across the world. So we know what people are testing in different countries. We communicate with them. We know what may be working in different countries. And then simply if you're just a GAABS member, you can find out much more useful information about what may work in your area than if you're just basically reading books or tweets or just listening to the news. I think that is also one really big benefit of GAABS.
Yeah. I have been amazed with my podcast that I did not think, I had no context as to how many people would be finding it from around the world. And when I get emails I'm in Spain, I'm in South Africa, I'm wherever, and I love the show. I do have a lot of listeners in India that reach out and when it is, non-English speaking and go, how do you even know what I'm amazed at your skill. That's far beyond anything I can do. But being able to have all those listeners and in our certificate program, which, Nuala had brought up, but at Texas A&M, it's been just awesome to see. So we've got a student in Peru and we have people in Mexico, from Turkey, and I have the hardest time pronouncing this, but it's Azerbaijan that we have a student from. And so just all over the place of people that are wanting to learn more and be part of the field, and people that do reach out to me from all over saying, it's funny everywhere. I think I've had people say, well, it's pretty new here. There's not really many people doing this yet in Japan, South America. But I think there aren't very many people doing it anywhere, to be fair, right? There are more people in the UK and in the US and Canada, but there really aren't tons and tons and tons of people everywhere. When I go and speak about it, so many people don't know what behavioral science even is yet still across industry. But you just see it less so far in the non-English speaking countries. And I love that GAABS is here to help really bridge that gap and help those people to find each other and connect and do something amazing in their space that might not have been possible, for another 5, 10, however many years down the road, that it can just propel everything to happen so much faster.
That's true. There are maybe not so many people doing it in other parts of the world, but in many countries, those who are doing it are extremely enthusiastic and motivated, maybe even more motivated than us here in the West, and they're really keen to connect, share their knowledge, help each other. So I think there are really a lot of many different resources that are untapped, a lot of social capital that is untapped when it comes to using behavioral science.
Right. And so hopefully those people will be able to find each other now in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise if they join GAABS, see the other members when that starts to get announced. I don't know when we all get to find out if we've made the cut or not, but
we will, in the next month, we will be launching the full application form online. So any of the people that have registered their interest currently and before then will then be notified that full applications will be open. And then we can all get together behind the scenes and connect.
Yay! And don't envy you the job of reviewing all the applications. So good luck. I'm
in the process of putting together a committee so that I do not have to do this all by myself.
Awesome. Well, we will definitely have a link to the website in the show notes for everyone who does want to add to those 550 interested notes to then be able to apply. And depending on, when you're listening to this, maybe you're already going to apply because this will live in perpetuity, of course. But what's the best way to get a hold of the group and to learn more? Where do people find you?
We are at gaabs.org, so GAABS.org. And you can find us on Twitter at GAABS.org. And you can find us on LinkedIn as well. So those are our channels. The website has a whole bunch of resources, our constitution, our code of conduct, our membership criteria, lots of information about who's involved and why we exist. And then as an ongoing feed of updates and new announcements, those will come through the social feeds, so through Twitter and LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, GAABS founding team, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. And I know that you are a piece of the founding team versus all the founders. It's such an amazing group of people. And, when you have Nobel laureates and things like that joining your group, you're doing something right. So excited that this exists. And thank you for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thanks, Melina.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you again to Torben, Nuala, Dario, and Maddie for joining me on the show today. I'm so excited about GAABS, as you probably heard during the discussion, as I was one of those very early applications of interest. As was said during the show, behavioral science is a field on the rise, and having a professional body to showcase and support the bona fide practitioners, as their website says, is so important. GAABS will help safeguard and maintain the quality and standards within the field, promote important insights and applications, be a prestigious community to build alliances with peers on a global level, with access to exclusive events, conferences, and educational programs, just so much more that I can't wait to watch unfold in the coming weeks, months, and years. I am honored that this group joined me on the Brainy Business today. And for anyone listening who is a practitioner of the behavioral sciences, I urge you to go to gaabs.org, GAABS.org, so you can apply to join as an individual or organization. Again, there are links in the show notes for you at thebrainybusiness.com/121. Thank you again to Torben, Dario, Maddie, and Nuala for joining me on the show today and for co-founding this amazing association. Next week on episode 122, we're decoding the why with Nate and Dorsky. It's going to be a lot of fun. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Molina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.